Hello and welcome back to this training. In this tutorial, we'll learn about index variables and how and when to use them in selectors. Let's begin. Today, we'll build a web automation project that extracts data from the Acme website. Let's have a look at the data in Acme. We don't need the entire table. Instead, we only want to read each individual number in the Work Item ID column. We'll start this new project by adding a sequence to the Designer panel. As always, we'll change the name and add a description to make sure that the purpose of the workflow is visible from the very beginning, obtaining the Work Item IDs from the Acme webpage. The selectors that we generated in the previous two tutorials were partial because we used the Attach Window activity. Today, we'll continue working with partial selectors, but we'll use Attach Browser instead. Let's indicate the browser window. We want to avoid using the screen scraping wizard to obtain the information in the table, so we'll use a getText activity. We can indicate any item in the Work Item ID column, say this one. Let's take a look at the generated selector by clicking Edit Selector. Let's take note of the table column and the table row attributes and their values. Let's see the selector in UI Explorer. If we click Indicate on screen again, but we select a different ID, such as the first one, we can see that the value of the row attribute changes and becomes 2. If we point to the last element in the list, the value changes once again. For now, we'll save the selector as it is. In the next steps, we want to loop through the Work Item ID UI elements by using an int32 variable to change the value of the table row attribute. Let's create a new variable of integer type called index. As we've already seen, the first cell that holds a Work Item ID contains a table row attribute with the value 2. So, we can set a default value of 2 for our variable. Let's open the selector editor again to replace the value of the table row attribute with our variable. We'll select the table row input field and hit Ctrl plus space, which enables us to select the variable. Let's click OK. Now, we've just created a dynamic selector that has a default value. Next, we'll add a while loop inside the Attach Browser activity. There are 12 rows in our table, so let's type the condition index is lesser than 12. Let's drag the getText activity and drop it in the body section. We'll create a variable to store the output for each item. Let's call it text. Next, we'll write the Work Item ID value to the output panel using a log message activity. The message is Work Item ID followed by a colon, a space, and the text variable. Last but not least, let's make sure that the value of the index variable increases after each iteration. We'll use an assign activity and type index plus 1 in the value field. Let's save and run the workflow. Alright, the output panel now contains all of the Work Item IDs, so the dynamic selector that we created earlier works perfectly. To sum up, in this demo, we've explored how when the situation requires it, we can use a variable of integer type in a selector to iterate through a series of UI elements. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy automation!